So our feedback from the last meeting, things that were positive, majority thought that the material was clear and that the training was relevant. The mix of presentations and activities, connections was engaging, breakout sessions worked well, and the response rate on the survey. Things that are being tracked to improve, dedicated time with coaches, and more training on project management. So these are the things that came out of the feedback. So at the end of the day, we'll have opportunity to give feedback again as well. So the presentations on the historical trauma that was done by, was there something you wanted to say about this? No? Okay.
No, just shouting out anyone and shouting out anybody who attended it. I know Miss Caroline White was at the trainings, and a lot of other people were. And so these anti-racism trainings wrapped up at the end of last month. So just shout out to everyone who attended and making sure to keep holding on to that as we keep getting into the work.
Okay, yeah. And is there anybody that wants to share anything that they took away from the training?
Hi, this is Carol.
Hi, Carol.
Hello, everyone. So great to see everyone. I just thought that it was very empowering, things that I have not considered going deeper, as with the emotional emancipation, the feelings of it, and not being in touch with what was happening on the inside, as when we see life flash before our eyes of the trauma of historical emotional emancipation, historical trauma and racism. And also it gives me great hope to go deeper in helping humanity. But first, I know I must put my own mask on first, like in a plane ride, before I help someone else. And it makes it very uncomfortable in recognizing the historical racial trauma and the emotional emancipation and putting it all together. But it also gives me hope from my blind spot to the spot of the sun is still shining, and it's up to us to make a difference in this world, to make it better, and make this world a better place than what we found it. So I'm open to that. I'm excited about what ROI, what Seth and Benji is doing, and everyone that's on this video. I just think that Mr. Jackson and his team did an amazing job in explaining it, where we are still healing and hurting and didn't even recognize that there was a sore spot there. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it until y'all show me otherwise to change it. I'm open. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Allen White. And if anyone inside your organization wants more training or coaching or support, Melvin and Misha are available. So feel free to let them know or let us know. Thanks so much for
wonderful. The courthouse is, starting first with my staff. I mean, it's just so amazing, even as when you all came to the community forum a year or two ago, just opening up. We're definitely going to be keeping you all abreast and staying connected with these resources. Thank you.
Cool. So thanks so much, Yvette. This next section is just a little preview of taking a second to ground and kind of where we've been and where we're going, and just really, really excited to see y'all. I woke up excited this morning because it was a convening day. These are like the highlights of the month, so just really glad to be on with you all. And a piece of feedback we've gotten from the first few convenings is that we could do a better job at giving clarity or communicating about where we are, where we're headed as a cohort. So these next maybe 2 or 3 minutes are just going to be an attempt to kind of share that and share some visuals. And the big reminder here is that you got a big team around you. You have your wonderful coaches, facilitators, the ROI staff. So if anything I share feels overwhelming, please let us know. And then just know that you will have a whole team of support in many directions as we get into this second part of the program. And so just beginning with the end in mind, I know trauma can feel really big. And so what the end goal looks like, what each team and what we're collectively going towards is that by the end of the program, teams will be able to define the problem they're solving and test out 3 different ideas. And that's really it, like define the challenge and test out 3 different ideas. And we hope that, those ideas can give us data and show us what works and what doesn't work. But it really is, that's the North Star we're all going towards in the program. Define the challenge we're going towards and test out at least a minimum of three ideas around that. And so the process you all have been following is called human-centered design. And it draws from systems mapping with Bailey and engaging inquiry. But we just wanted to share this visual to kind of ground us in it. And it's really just a 2-step process. It's about framing the problems correctly and then finding the best solutions. And we really follow a couple key steps. We start at number 1 with researching possibilities. Then we identify patterns. We prototype and test out possible solutions. And then hopefully by the end, we have some paths forward that we can recommend and a direction we're going to head as an organization. And more specifically, there are these 5 steps that you all have been doing. But first, we begin with empathizing and interviewing the people we serve. Then we define and get really clear on insights. And then we move into this second part of the program, so we're now moving into this second part of the right diagram, where we're going to come up with ideas, test them in very small ways, and then reflect on what happened. And we're going to do that loop again and again and again. So you're going to do this loop over and over, at least a minimum of 3 times, so that by the end we'll have three ideas that we have tested and have like a path forward. And so just to show it more simply, this is kind of the same diagram shown in order. And when you get down to ideate, test, and reflect, we just do that cycle again and again and again. And huge shout out to everyone. You guys have done the first 2 steps in the process. You've empathized with users, you've interviewed people, you've defined insights. And so now we're moving into the second part of the program. And just in case, just going to share a brief. We actually did this process for the program we are all participating in right now. And let me know if my internet gets choppy. I just got an unstable sign. But just quick example, to build resilient leaders, we started with empathy. We defined a priority population and did empathy interviews and talked to different experts across the country. And that led to defining insights. And so the big insight was, how can we better support public agencies in rural Eastern North Carolina to implement trauma-informed programs? And that was our core insight. And the non-obvious insight was that there are programs like the one you're now in that are all over the country, but those aren't located in rural and in Eastern North Carolina. And so then we moved into this phase of ideating, testing, and reflecting. And so we defined a design challenge, which is what you all do today. And that really focuses on what are we trying to solve for. We did a bunch of brainstorming, which you all will also do. Came up with a bunch of ideas and then started to test them. So we did the first test where we made simple 1-pagers and got feedback from people. We reflected. Went back and did a second test, more ideas, more testing, where we started to flesh out what the program could look like. Reflected on that, and then did a final ideation and test, which is the program we're all in together right now, with these 2 phases. And so the outcome is the cohort that we're all a part of. And so it doesn't have to be as big as a whole program like we're all participating in. It's just important to note that the it's really starting small and making small changes happen. And so just wanted to give that kind of frame and overview as where we've been and where we're heading as we go into the second part of the program. And so, yeah, that's really what we're on deck for the rest of the program, is coming up with ideas, testing them, and then reflecting on them and seeing what works and what doesn't for the people we serve. Any questions or anything before we hit to the next section?
Okay, well, next up we have Jenny with reflections.
Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Echoing Seth, I'm so excited to be back together and really just very much inspired by the Dream, Sing, Cry exercise. So thank you for always, just being so open and wonderful as humans. We're going to do a little bit more reflecting right now. Can everybody see my screen okay? Great. I'm seeing some very vigorous head nods that I appreciate. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you need a moment to just grab like a really comfortable position, I'm going to move too. I need to sit in a different way. Grab your notebook, some paper and some pen. And while everybody's getting, the materials that they need, if I could get one of my lovely co-organizers to start our reflection playlist. We're just going to kind of settle into doing some free write. And what I would say about these free writes is, please don't worry about grammar, making sense. You don't even have to write whole sentences if that's not what you're feeling today. This is really just to kind of get some thinking going around, where you have already been and what you've already been doing. And so that's what we're going to do. By show of hands, emoji thumbs up, how many people are ready to do our free writes? Give me need a little something. Yep, thank you. Loving the hands. All right, it seems like I got a pretty good sea of hands. So I think with that, we're going to get going. And the first thing I'm going to ask you to write to for 3 minutes is just, we're going to do a little zooming in. How did it feel interviewing someone else? So if you did the interviews for your team, just writing to, what that kind of emotionally evoked for you. It doesn't have to be all those interviews. It could be one that has just stayed with you. What has stayed with you through having conversation with others about your project and community needs, and just really thinking through what that experience felt like. So not necessarily what you learned, but what you felt doing those empathy interviews. And we'll just take a couple minutes and see if we can get that music going while we are. And just so you know, I've put my phone timer on, so you might hear that ring, but that's just to keep me on track. right, now we're going to go to our next prompt, which is really around assumptions and surprises. So, if you want to go over to the next page in your notebook or just make some space below from where you wrote, what confirmed or challenged an assumption you held during these empathy interviews? And what surprised you, or what did you learn that you think might surprise others? And so we'll spend another 3 minutes on this prompt. All right, we're going to go on to our final prompt, my timer off, which is all about connections. So it's writing to, really zooming out on the whole interviews that you worked on and what connections or patterns you might be seeing between your team's empathy interviews, and what challenges or bright spots or other questions are coming up for you as you're listening to these interviews and thinking about them today. We'll do 3 more minutes. come back together. I'm going to share my screen again. And what we're going to do now is go into breakout rooms. And in these breakout rooms, you're going to be kind of focusing on one of these topics, because as I'm sure when you were writing, things that came up was we could spend probably a half hour, even more together, just talking about one of these. So we're going to take a little bit time in smaller groups, diving deeper. And what we'll do is everybody will share, you know, a little bit of their free write on that topic and respond to each other through these sticky boards, which I've put in the chat, and I'll do it again in a second, a link to this presentation so everybody can kind of come on it. And in the same way we've used the sticky boards in the past, just kind of writing down as each other are sharing their free writes, what stands out to you, so that we can share this collective body of knowledge at the end of our reflection session today. So without further ado, I'm going to ask one of my co-facilitators to put us in breakouts, and we'll spend about 7-8 minutes diving into one of these topics together.
Cool. I'm gonna send people out, but tell me if you don't get the invite. And then we'll be back at like 1:52. Cool.
Great. Group 3, I'm just going to have somebody come forward as our volunteer when it's time. But I hope you all had, our discussion was just really interesting and beautiful, and I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to kind of share the discussions that they had as well. So I'm going to share my screen and ask for group 1, who had that emotional knowledge question about how it felt to interview somebody else, if somebody from that group can kind of just briefly summarize or share just a few points from that conversation with the larger group.
All right, I'm going to give it a shot. Thanks to Stephen for volunteering me to do that. Thank you. So I think if you look across the emotional knowledge kind of stickies that we have there, you're going to see words like anxious, you know, as folks are going into it, anxious about, I think, the process, but then anxious about kind of how are we sitting in that presentation, or how are we sitting in that interview as well. There was relief to be able to sit down and talk with some folks, I think. There was frustration at times as you're hearing barriers that people are coming up with, and frustration for folks, you know, and not being able to do anything about it right away, but feeling frustrated by hearing what they're having to deal with. And then also just feeling empowered to be able to ask those questions, connecting with folks within these different systems, and feeling like you can, you know, provide some, even just the conversation, starting that conversation starts getting other to think a little bit differently too, including ourselves. So I think it was a combination of like probably how we'd all feel in a new experience: anxious, excited, frustrated, empowered, all those things. And so I think it was really good, rounded conversation. Anything I missed there, team?
Great. Thank you so much, group 1, and really appreciate you holding up all those emotions that are often even in tension with each other when we're conducting these empathy interviews, and that the interviewer themselves is not, you know, some neutral, emotionless bystander, but is holding a lot of those emotions when doing this. All right, group 2. Do I have a speaker volunteer from group 2?
So we got cut off before we decided who was going to be the speaker. So hopefully someone is willing to jump in.
I'll jump in. Oh no, Melissa, you go for it.
No. I'm gonna let Kyle go because I'm gonna misspeak and not paraphrase your last point. So you go ahead.
Okay. Well, I guess that can also become part of the assumptions and surprises. So we noticed that a common thread for us was that the interviewers were nervous. And interestingly enough, a lot of times people think when they show up to an interview that the interviewer will be the person who's like, I'm strong, I'm good, I'm here for this. but we all kind of felt inadequate in some spaces with that. And so surprisingly awkward when doing interviews because of that dynamic. And so it was also communicated that a lot of people interviewed had the same outlook. And so when talking to a populace about the same general thing, a lot of people had the same perspective, the same outlook on the things that were being talked about. It's difficult to be present in interview and not be too much in your own head. And so that was one of those things for me that I communicated, that it's really difficult. Like, I want to ask good questions. And I think that part of that was, as amazing as the ROI is and training and equipping, it also challenges to make you think like, hey, is this a good question? And does this lead to the intended outcome or whatever that outcome might be? And so just kind of getting in your own head and processing through way too much. But that surprising that people actually felt supported in our environment, surprisingly positive. And that when a lot of times people, when doing interviews, are expecting negative, because people quickly run to the negative, people bond over the negative, our minds naturally align with the negative, but the responses in the interviews were actually pretty positive. And the thing that was surprising, like how supported people felt, you know. And I think that whenever I look for, and I'm sure this may be common for a lot of times, a lot of people, when they look for feedback, you're expecting, how can I become better and what can I change? But when interviewing people and they actually are giving you like, hey, this is great, this is good, it's shocking, like, wait, what? Because you're in your own head, and so you know all the negatives, that your perspective of people perceive you very differently. So a lot of people felt supported. And other thing was, like, it was surprising how little people advocated for themselves. That when doing interviews and people were talking about some of the struggles and experiences that they had, it's surprising that they didn't do something about it or speak up in their space. And gave the example of, like, if you go out to a restaurant and someone says, how's your meal? Oh, everything's great, thank you so much. And as soon as the person walks away, you're like, this is horrible, I can't believe that this is going on. You go home and complain about it. You go home and you may even write a review. But when you had the ability to get your meal adjusted, or you had the ability to talk to the manager in a positive way, to advocate for change, like, people choose oftentimes not to do that and instead just leave a space and don't go back. And so there was surprising, like, how little people advocate for themselves. And then the results, it seemed common sense, like the results of the questions, like all of this seems super common. Like, when asking questions of what should exist, how should this be, what is needed, the answers seem like, oh yeah, that makes sense because we're human beings and that should exist. But when you look at the systems and the entities, a lot of times it's like, why isn't this already a thing for us? And like, so the common sense thing isn't a part of the system and it isn't a part of the application. And so it's surprising that we miss that on a regular basis oftentimes. And the last thing is people being willing to share their opinions. They're actually really nervous and concerned about that they wouldn't have the right answer. And so, you know, they oftentimes they look at the interviewee, say, oh, I'm going to be interviewed. They set this appointment to interview me. And it's like they feel like they're on a job application or a job interview, and they're nervous. But all we need to do is like tell them for them to speak fully and truly and freely as themselves. But they oftentimes think that they won't have the right answer, which on the other side of that is kind of concerning, because it's like, are they giving the full answer? And are they speaking the whole truth? Or are they giving a false review, kind of dynamic. And so that is surprising that people are nervous about sharing their own stories when they just have to literally tell us about themselves.
Wow. Thank you so much, group 2, for sharing. And that restaurant analogy is going to stay with me. I think that's so well said and relatable. And also just a lot of really good insights here. Group 3, will somebody step forward and also share some of the highlights or learnings from our discussion? I don't want to put you on the spot, but Corey, do you mind?
Sure, I don't mind. So in our discussion, we found out that, people are just burned out. They're amped up, and we have to find a balance. One thing we also thought of, figured out, and we saw some patterns that, people want the same thing. on my end, I found out through my interviews that people want change. They want the same thing as far as the community and the school. At the end of the day, we have the same goal in mind, is that we want students to be successful. Also, students, families want their child to come to a place that they feel safe. Also, in the interviews, Miss Valerie shared that she received feedback from her parents, and they were very grateful for the support that the school provided to them and to the community. So out of that, we learned that it's very important to build those relationships. And as I reflect upon the interviews, it's just a call for me in my leadership to be a gap filler, to be the bridge that connects the community and the school so that we can build a trusting relationship between the community and the school.
Thank you. Wanted to say too, we very intentionally tried to match you up in these breakout groups with people not on your teams. We do these reflection exercises because I think it's important to process these experiences that can be very intense in multiple ways. So, one through writing and just seeing what comes out from pen to paper. One through these discussions with each other where we can, you all are going through very different but similar experiences at the same time. And there's a lot of shared knowledge there. So to take advantage of that, and then to figure out ways we can support each other. Because a lot of times these conversations and reflections actually produce more questions than they answer, right? And that's totally normal and part of the process. So I also just wanted to leave a little space at the end if somebody didn't get a chance to share something or had something on their mind that came up either in their written reflection or group that they thought they'd like to share with the larger group. Feel free to just come off of mute. All right, no problem. And we'll continue to do these check-ins and reflections just so we can continue to share things as we process. The last thing I wanted to talk about with my time block was just a loving reminder to please submit your future memory. We are going to use these at the end as part of our closing celebration, but there are two different ways you could submit. One is if you haven't already done so, sending it in by mail to ROI. And the second is if you'd like to just record via voicemail your memory, if that's easier. I know sometimes getting to the post or getting something in writing can be a little hard. There's a number here to call. We'll share it with the group after the convening as well, where you can just leave a voicemail of your reading and we can take it that way. Are there any other questions just about the future memory piece before I pass the mic? All right, well, thank you all so much again for, as always, I'm just, I've been really missing this group and I'm always just so humbled and grateful for your openness in sharing what you're learning on this journey with everyone, and just appreciate you all. So thank you.
Yvette, you're muted, I think.
I'm sitting here talking to myself, y'all. Thanks, Jenny. I just want to thank you for that reflection and just the I want to say the connection that you bring to the group and the warmth and there's a depth there that I think gets communicated so well through this screen, and I just really appreciate that. So thanks, Jenny. And so up next, we've got Bailey and Vici, and they're going to talk about how to frame and design the challenge.
Yeah,
I believe I'm up next.
I was going to say.
Yes. Okay. No worries at all, Yvette. So basically,
okay.
Moving from Jenny's session where we were all reflecting on how the interviews went, the next stage is kind of to reflect on how the insight statements are going. I know that I'm totally aware that those are super challenging. I honestly, to this day, still find insights the most difficult part of the design process. And they can sometimes take forever, but then it's like an epiphany. Or sometimes it's like right away, you're like, oh my God, this thing is jumping right out at me. And I know that it's something that's an aha moment. But like I said, it's a difficult part of the process. So I just kind of wanted to get an idea from all of you, from each of the groups, sort of where you're at with that. So if we could go around to each of the groups, maybe I'll tap the coaches to share kind of where you're at and maybe what you might need support with, like if there's any help or questions that you have. Those questions might not be answered now in a big group, but we can follow up with you afterwards so that coaches and facilitators can plug in where necessary. So with that, I guess I will nominate the Hope team to go first, and then Hope team, you can nominate another team to go next, and so on.
Hey guys, I'm Heidi. I'm the coach for the Hope team. So the Hope team has knocked it out of the park in terms of interviews. They rocked those interviews out. And then when they were looking at their insights, they decided to add some more interviews, specifically an alum of the Hope program and I believe possibly a parent. And I know Crystal was working on that, so she may have some additional information to chime in here. And then the Hope team also has like a summer research associate who's available to them to do some research. So she is specifically looking at some evidence-based practices and got some recommendations from the team about some things that they would specifically like some additional information on. So she's gonna join us at our next specific team meeting to fill the team in on some of the research that she's done. But I would love to kind of stop here and see if Tremaine, Crystal, or Corey wanna chime in here and add anything.
I'm sorry, I stepped away, Heidi. I'm sorry. I know that you said something about the research. I know that one thing I did ask her is to find out some evidence practice that we could utilize to help us better serve our Black males that come into our facility. So strategies that we could use to, build those relationships, also to empower them and to really build those strong relationships even after they have transitioned from our program. So some effective practices that we can use to build those relationships. So I know that was one of the things that I really reached out and asked her to share some feedback on.
So Alyssa is our kind of summer research associate. And so that information she's collecting for the team on those evidence-based practices is really going to inform us as we move into kind of finding the right solution and pilot testing some of those ideas. And just wanted to see if Crystal wanted to provide any follow-up on additional interviews.
Yeah, definitely tried to get those interviews set up, but there were a lot of life circumstances that happened and just didn't make it possible. However, I had informal communications with the people that I was wanting to interview. But even that gave me a lot of insight into things that we can do and ways that we can support our students after they graduate. I mean, and even just how can we support them on the way to graduation. I had a chance to talk to Pooja on Monday, and there were a lot of things that she brought up that, you just don't think about these kids going into life and the documents that they need in order to be able to get a job and sustain a job and, always. And I think the most important thing for me, and maybe it's just because I'm an emotional person, but I want my students to feel like they can call me if they need help after they have graduated. Like, to me, if they walk out of that program and something hard comes up and they're able to send me a text because they feel like I'm one of the people that can help them and they're willing to be vulnerable with me, then I've been successful. So I think just having those practical things set up, but also cultivating the type of relationships that are going to last long after they're out of our doors I think is the most important. But just doing the interviews and talking to them and working in this has helped me to see a lot that we can do to get better, and we are going to get better. And I think just doing the interviews has been really helpful with that.
First of all, I'm hearing some really awesome themes there. So one of them was, first of all, it sounds like there's kind of a focus on the transition program, transitioning out of your program and what happens when they're kind of in the real world. So that seems like an interesting kind of focus that you've brought to the work. And I even heard some insights just in what you were saying just now around like whether that's focusing in on Black male youth and that experience in particular, or focusing in on like how you strengthen relationships and make sure that people have someone when they get out, or like those practical areas. It sounds like there's like definitely some stuff there that you're following, which is really exciting. Is there anything that the team could help you with, either anyone on the facilitator or coaching team or anyone in the group in general?
I was just thinking about resources. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
was that
no,
was
what, Mr. Williams?
Was that question directed towards Crystal?
No, it was towards the team.
Okay. I was just thinking, like even after a student, what kind of job skills that can be provided for these students. So oftentimes, the students feel like they don't have anything outside of what they know. So we want to provide experiences for them. If they can job shadow someone that might pique their interest into a career, just show them the possibilities. Like I said, one thing that we started last year that really surprised me, we started a group thumb project with these students, and they really took ownership of it. So there were some bigger things that we had in mind for as growing fruits and vegetables where they can sell at the local farmer market. Some ideals like that for them to just take ownership and learn how to earn an honest wage. And then we pour that back into the program and celebrate them for what they've done. So just some things, some resources that we can connect them with. Anything you want to add, Crystal? Or Mr. Robinson?
No, I think Pooja had just asked, if there was any help. I would honestly just have to think about it for a while. So
I have a question.
Go for it, Tremaine.
Are there any local programs in the area? Because another problem that we may find is transportation, for students, that have graduated or out of the program or whatever. Is there transportation programs, local programs, where these kids can get the information as far as working, and if they're not continuing with education, are there any local programs that can help with this process? When I say local, I mean within the area, because it's hard for a lot of the students who are not driving or whatever to get places to. We may get the information for them, but then, is there a way that they can get to some of these sources?
So Pooja, if there's some team support when we go to our breakout later today, who would be, I'm not in EdgeCom, who would be more knowledgeable or could provide some assistance with local resources, we'd love for them to jump in our group later this afternoon.
I am also not an EdgeCom, but potentially Vici and Seth would know who would be the right person to join. So we'll definitely make sure someone's in there. Would you like to nominate another group to go next?
Yeah, we would love to hear from our friends at the EdgeCom Courthouse.
All right. I can start as coach, and then I'll call on my teammates to kind of fill in the gaps or expound upon what we're doing. So I think when it came to the interviews, I think it was a little bit eye-opening, and I think our team has looked at the interviews and have identified some folks that they want to go back to talk and just get more curious about some of the different responses they were getting to some of the questions they had. So we have a blend of both the courthouse and graders coming as the church piece, and so trying to balance those two pieces. And so I think in both the church faith-based area and in the courthouse, there are folks that the team wants to go back to and go a little bit deeper with some of the questions. And I think some of our activities and exercises have helped with that to go back for those things. Also identifying like maybe there's other folks that we should start interviewing as well. That would be really helpful to the process. And one of those, well, before I say that, getting a little bit more focused on what do we really want to start concentrating on, especially over the next few months, because it's a pretty broad thing when you talk about a trauma-informed court system, or how would faith-based help the court system with that. And so really going to try to focus in on the reentry program, and Ms. White can probably speak a little bit more to that, but really focusing in on that, and then interviewing folks that are coming out, or what courts are starting to refer to as returning citizens, and what does that look like and feel like for folks coming out, and while they're in the prison or jail system, how does that feel when they come out? How are parents, how are families affected? And then how do we blend in the faith-based side of that as well? And so how can we get different things incorporated? So hearing from Hope too about the different services that they're looking to incorporate, I think there's the same kind of mindset as we have returning citizens coming back into the community. What kind of transportation, jobs, all those types of things are going to be some similar things for us all to be thinking about. Trying to think. What else, team? Erica or Ms. White, Kimberly? Silence, radio silence.
Kim is trying to speak. She just unmute. Thank you, Coach. I believe Kim.
I was going to say, I think that you pretty much covered the inside of it as far, what we're doing. We, in discussing with each other, we realized that we only touched the surface of our interviews. And, we did realize with all three, all the interviews that we did, there was a common, it was a common area of which they all said the same thing, but they just said it in a different way, in a different role. And reentry is a very needed program. There is one that is existing in Edgecombe County now, and there's been another one that existed before that, that's with It Starts With You. And our targeted population, we just need to dig deeper to see what it is that we can do to help people deal with the trauma of being a returning citizen, but also helping the families, plus seeing what we can do as far as broadening the vision of the courthouse and how judges and probation officers and all of those can dig in. And we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, because you can't do so much but to the court system, because you got to go in at a broader experience. But you can learn how to see what we can do about changing the behavior of the people who are serving the people that are being served. And that's a little bit, but I do know that we're just touching the surface.
I love hearing all of this, both from you and Hope, just this idea of first you did a very broad swath of interviews that showed you where the interest and like kind of momentum really was, and taking a look at like what the services are that already exist, and then figuring out like, yeah, how do you change the behaviors of each of those players? Like really, what is a trauma-informed system, right? It's like each of the players being trauma-informed in the way they act. And so how do you influence that behavior? I think that's a really exciting kind of thread to follow, and totally agree that like the right next step is potentially going deeper with those interviews, even potentially shadowing parts of that reentry program that you're able to kind of really get a deep understanding of that entire process from the end user perspective, who is the re-entering citizen, but or returning citizen, but also like everyone proximate to them, like you were saying. And maybe like, I think one of the exciting things about your journey in particular is that you have the courthouse that's relatively kind of, you know, slightly difficult to move, or you can move only like sort of on the margins. But then the other side is like you have the faith-based system, which potentially also plays a large role in at least the families' lives that you potentially have a lot more flexibility with. So how you put those together could be really interesting.
And you know, another thing is while we're processing these interviews, we're also learning how to take ourselves deeper with the same thing. You know, it's an eye-opening for us as a team, right, team?
That's right. That's correct.
And I'd mentioned too, something that will help, I think, move the courthouse side of it. And maybe some of you know this already, but the Chief Justice for North Carolina courts is kind of has this platform just announced within the last month or so for all the courts to become ACE informed. And so there's a statewide task force, you know, that lots of different members of both the legislature and other kind of key stakeholders around the state are going to go that route. And so I think from a top level of support, it's not just our team saying, you know, kind of trying to push the system. There's this larger system that's that they'll be able to turn to for support as well. So it's pretty exciting timing, actually.
That's amazing. All right. Quickly, any asks for help, and then nominate another group to go next.
I think the only ask, and I think we've talked about, is just probably just about a month or so or two away, is just for some additional conversation about ROI or additional explanation or re-presentation of what ROI is to the court system and potentially to the faith-based system that Ms. White's putting together.
And that is so correct, Coach. And Erica, do you have anything to add? Okay, thank you.
Would you like to nominate another group to go next?
Thank you, Coach. Thank you, team.
How about, is it Spate?
It is Spate. Thank you so much. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. One thing that we found, we were looking at special populations, specifically EC students and things of that nature, as we have done our interviews, just like everyone else has said. I wanted to go out and interview every child, every stakeholder. I mean, once you start, it's like you found some gold and you want to keep going. But we have also found through this process that I know Mrs. Holmes could speak to as well, our LGBTQ students, which in our world, that is just not something you talk about. But we have been dealing with those situations for some time now. And I was very moved by what information she found. And we have put some things into place, not just for that population, but also for our EC students. And we just see that more is needed. So I'll let her go along with that. And of course, Mr. Sutton can talk with us about our EC students as they see fit.
We just had some interesting insights about the supports that not only you think about the counselors, you think about the psychologists and the student services realm, but our teachers on the hallway, which are like the first line. And like one student made the comment, he was like, you know, well, you tell the teachers, I want to be called by a different name because I identify this particular way. And it was immediate. There was no pushback. And the other thing that was mentioned is that they realized that throughout the school, and there never was like a huge conversation. They didn't know how it happened, but we would basically hear the teachers refer to a student as a certain name. So we just all started to call the student the name. There was no big meeting, but that was the thing that stood out the most for me. And the other thing that stood out, Mr. Sutton brought this out as we met and talked about the interviews, is how far we've come. Because when we first had this issue years back, that was not the response of the school. Some things were put in place. Some things were given to us by Ms. Budd that we were supposed to do, directives we were supposed to follow, and how we were supposed to deal. And those things sometimes did not happen, and which would cause a whole nother conundrum of a situation, because, you know, people didn't, I don't want to say, but I mean, people didn't respect, you know, the student. And to see us like come from there, which was like our first experience, to where we are now, and, you know, to interview these students, and to see what they see, it was really touching. We do realize, as we have people come in and out, we have discussed that we need to do PD. It's something that we do need to talk about, because it's something that really, as Ms. Buzz said, we don't talk about at the district level. It's a very taboo subject. So, but we know at our school, it's something that's happening, and it's something that's going to continue to happen, and we need to deal with it, and we need to make our students and our parents feel comfortable and supported in the environment that we are in.
And uh, as far as the EC students, and I thought that was a lot of progress, at least with the LGBTQ population and spate. We have certainly come a long ways. Then it's the other subpopulations, or part of our priority group, are students who are Latinx students who have experienced a parent being removed from the home, um, and that particular taboo topic in that population of students. Um, and I've explored options for those, and we've gotten some insight, because I listened to a PD from a Mexican therapist who went through um, a lot of the societal norms and the cultural background that controls how they seek um, therapy, or how they seek help of any kind after trauma. And so it really, there were several barriers to getting help in that population that I was suspicious of, because I've worked with a lot of students who, Hispanic students or Latinx students, who have gone through that kind of trauma, and they have been identified as EC students for various reasons, and it makes it so much worse. But, you know, for example, they don't have the intake forms for the therapists that we have used in the past. They're in English, and so you have to get a translator or an interpreter. They're not really doing business right now anyway at all. And then there's the the norm not to seek any kind of help in that culture. It can be a male type of background, but it's also a Latinx background. So just seeking out help from outside agencies is kind of not okay with the ones that we're trying to get it to. So that's one thing we've done. Then the other one are uh, are racial type inequality and intergenerational trauma for students who are primarily Black young men, young men or women. They might be experiencing taboo topics, and their resources for them. Now, the one that hits me the closest are students with disabilities. And, we just went through a student who died, and that sort of hit home to me. It was very emotional. And I was working over the summer with other people who work with that student. And so the trauma that he has gone through and the number of ACE, his ACE score would be out the roof. But we really have got to, it's up to me and it's up to the adults, the people who come across him, to help him understand when there's a problem with safety and when there's a problem with just getting some help. It was a tragic situation that he died in, but he had transferred to another school system. His mother had died, his foster mother. He'd been through the adoption services. He was being cared for by a loving, very loving, wonderful, godly woman. She died. She had set up for him to be taken care of, and I think he was being cared for. But the population that he's in, with disabilities and coming from that level of trauma, he would trust a lot of people, that probably didn't have his best intentions at heart. And so exploring some of those things has been very insightful to me. And I think I'm still trying to come up with ways to help students with disabilities who've gone through trauma like that avoid falling into safety traps, or giving, like I think Crystal mentioned, having a number or somebody he would trust, even though he's not graduated. If he had somebody to call, to say, call the police or call an ambulance, that knew him, because he couldn't always express himself, that would probably prevent his death. So
That's one of the things that Mr. Sutton spoke about in some of the different interviews that we've had. For me, as the leader of our school, it's about safety. And if our children who are different, who are not, as we would say, of the norm, or who have different, they're exceptionals, or they have different genders, it is our responsibility as the adults in those buildings to have a safe place for those children. That's number one, to provide a safe place for those children. And we definitely need help to help them to know that their school is a safe place.
yes.
I mean, I hope you all are taking care of each other. That's an incredibly emotionally difficult situation, it sounds like. But similarly, I mean, it does sound like you're honing in on kind of the audience that you're interested in supporting, and kind of potentially some of the ways. The only thing I would suggest is not to necessarily get into solutions mode yet of how you're going to make those safe places happen, but to really kind of live in those experiences of the challenges that you're having currently, and some of the progress you've had. So some of the opportunities you're already seeing, and to really hone in and like understand those things really, really well, so that when you get to that solutioning time, you're being really, really kind of focused and sharp about the solutions you're looking for, and that you think would push the envelope the most towards creating those safe spaces that you're looking for. Is there any support that you need, and can you nominate someone to go next?
We most definitely need professional development, I believe, for our faculty. Any type of resources that we can have to help see this from the proper lens, what our goal is. We definitely need that type of support from our team. Is there anyone else that thinks of some things that we need? Of course, resources are always helpful. Okay. What is a group that has not gone? I'm sorry.
The Reach Center hasn't gone. We'd be happy to jump in.
Yes, please, Melissa. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Budd. Well, I will tee it up a little bit and then pass it to Trishanda, because she can speak to more of the depth of the insights. But the Reach team has done quite a number of interviews. Their first round, they felt like they didn't get as deep as they wanted into insights. And so they went back, did some more. And I think that what they've come up with is a whole host of insights that I think we're kind of the next phase is like sorting through those and kind of parsing out and bucketing those. But some of the themes, just in looking at some of the initial insights, seem to be about questions about the impact that they want to make, how sustainable that impact is, and trust. Trust was huge. There were a couple, like there was one interview where they, you know, one of the insights was, I felt like she really did trust us. And then there was another interview where we're not sure, you know, I wonder if they didn't trust us because XYZ happened. And so with that, and they're also kind of around the impact thing, grappling with, you know, this whole thing about how sustainable is what we do? Are we just putting a bandage on these challenges and things that folks face? And how might we, you know, just keep that in mind as we're kind of working with folks. So Trishana, did I tee that up?
You did.
Okay, there she is.
You did. And so she is right. When we first did our first set of interviews, we kind of went by some of the follow-up questions that we always do with our clients. Well, our champions, we call them champions. So we kind of went with some of those questions, but then as we went back in and started doing the insights, we realized that maybe we weren't going deep enough to really find out how, because we want to use that information to kind of help shape our programs and see if we're going in the right direction. Are we really having an impact for where we're going? And we wanted to make sure we was asking questions where we were building programs based on what the client or the champion felt like they needed. So some of the stuff that we realized is the first time around, we did interviews with individuals who came in for services with their rent and utilities, but our services are so much broader than that. We do a lot around medication, healthcare. So we wanted to make sure that we was interviewing people from all areas of our programs. And so some of the stuff that really rose to the surface for us is that, for one, it's about that we heard a lot of fear in that the champions, you know, didn't really trust. Not so much trust us, but they just had a problem with trust, you know, especially with young mothers who we were interviewing. If they voiced what was really going on with them, what they was really experiencing, is there a chance that social services is going to show up at their door? And then also some of the interviews we did with individuals who may have drug and alcohol use. What we realized is that, you know, if they really were, you know, that kind of feeling of, if they really was honest about what they were going through, did that determine how much help that they would get? So we had a lot of that in some of our interviews. And some of the other stuff that we ended up realizing was, that kind of came up out of it, was that, are we, one, really utilizing the partnerships that we have? We have great partnerships across the state and across the country, but are we really utilizing those partnerships to the best of our ability? You know, is it something else that we need to add to the table? Another thing that we realize is that, are we really utilizing the expertise and the gifts of our team? For instance, on our team, we have a licensed substance abuse counselor, but are we really utilizing her in that capacity? We have social workers on our team that volunteer. Are we really using them in the capacity that we could? And so so the interviews just allow us to just go deeper and to look at our team as a whole, and then look at our processes and see what we need to change. And so for us, we still want to go back and do more interviews, just to help us with, like I said, with us navigating our programs and our services out, and making sure that we're collecting the information that we need to collect in order to really provide what the community needs.
I think that totally makes sense. It sounds like you're, again, totally doing the right things. The one thing you said earlier, you were like wary of whether you were creating like Band-Aid ideas. So my only thing is, like, somewhat controversially, you need both, like the Band-Aids, like stop the boat from sinking, like take the water out, and you need to like actually patch the boat, right? Like you need to actually fix the system too. But that doesn't mean you like don't do the thing that will provide immediate relief, right? So there is like, you want to balance both of those things, of course. For example, one of the things we're doing is around, like at my other work, my day job, is around like resource acquisition for young people and understanding that like it's really difficult. It takes like to get like housing voucher, for example, it's like an incredibly long process, and it's like so discouraging just to do that process. And so we were like, okay, we're not going to be able to change like HUD's housing voucher form like by next week. So let's just get people personal assistants who can like do that for them. And then on the side, figure out, okay, like, but also how do we figure out what like more systematically, how we impact what's being asked and and how we like make that process easier also. So I think there's like, definitely make sure you're keeping that tension in mind as well. Although agreed that, it sounds like you're finding lots of potential areas of impact. So diving deeper on all of those and figuring out kind of exactly where you want to focus your energies and ideas sounds like the right next move.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any asks for support? And is there anyone who hasn't gone yet?
So it will be probably around, I think someone said it just a while ago, around the professional personal development for the staff, particularly around that continued training around resilience. And how we work with individuals who are dealing with trauma, but then how we also recognize it in ourselves. And then continuing to build on our resources, finding out what services are out there and those best practices with the work that we're doing. And I think, who hasn't went? Impact Center hasn't went.
Hey y'all. So so just to remind, we're functioning as the Impact Academy, and so we are not actually a functioning organization yet. We're in that ground level of doing the interviews, getting the insight and all that stuff, and we're developing our program based on what we're learning and growing. And so, but not unfortunately, it was good. It's still good. We started this process a long time ago, and our open date is in August. And so we've created protocols, created systems, created all of the training centers and stuff like that. But now we're also revisiting those things based on the empathy interviews that we're doing. And so hopefully we won't have to put too many Band-Aids on as we are going through this thing. So our major insights that came along is that really expectations are crazy different for different people. And that has been, I think, one of the biggest, surprises for me. And so we did some interviews, and we interviewed families. So we interviewed parents. We also interviewed people who have worked in centers before, as well as people who, and like we've had conversations with people who run centers, like experts, and that's been pretty easy for us because we're going through the inspection stages. And so it's easy for us to kind of get information and insight from them. So with families, we realized that some families look at early childhood centers as a space to have their child while they're at work, and they have no expectations. It's just like, you're going to keep my kid alive. That's great. All right. And then there's others who are like, yeah, my child has graduated from this center and now they're going to kindergarten, and they don't know their numbers and they don't know their letters, and my child is behind, and I'm very disappointed in that dynamic. And then we had another family who interviewed, and their expectations were, so they're all just very different expectations from families. The interesting dynamic of that is, as we develop, we're like, hey, we know that children are going to develop on their natural stages. Like, they're not going to graduate or leave the Impact Academy knowing algebra because they're going to be 5 years old. We also want to push the envelope because in Eastern North Carolina and in our region, there is an early childhood deficit in terms of just quality centers and centers in general. But we also know that there's a deficit in the educational system. And so there's a lot of things that we want to fill the gap in between home and kindergarten. And so our expectation as a center is, hey, we're not just going to be taking care of your kid and make sure they're alive. I mean, we're going to make sure they're alive, right? Step one, safety is important, but we're also planning on like equipping them and educating them. And then we're also going to be doing resiliency training. And we're also going to require that families come to seminars. And so when thinking about the expectations that people have when coming to the Impact Academy, if they think I'm just paying you to take my kid, they're gonna be like, whoa, this might be too much of a commitment for me. And so just thinking about that dynamic means that we're going to put forth even more effort to communicate our expectations. That was our really big takeaway from that, is that and also one of the things that we're going to do is like take in and say, hey, families, what are your expectations? And so part of that interview process of acceptance, part of that application process is going to be added. What do you want from us? And what do you expect for your child to have when they come out? While also communicating very clearly what our vision and purpose is, while also functioning in the structure of the state mandates. And so that was another thing for us, the huge insight that we really just kind of are, I think, grappling with, is to make sure that we're living up to the state mandates and don't get shut down, because that's important. But then also, I know those, especially those in education, understand that sometimes the state mandates are good and they should be there, but we also have to make sure that we don't lose who we are while also holding up to those mandates, right? And so that's just a lot of balance that we're going to have to make sure that we do well, because we're adding a lot to the plate. We're adding a whole lot to the plate for the typical early childhood center. And so being able to create a structure and a protocol. And one more thing is that, like, when we can build the structure, we realize in talking to some teachers, because that's, again, when we do our interviews for the people we're trying to employ, we're getting insight from them. And so we ask them, hey, so tell us we don't want the drama, like don't drag your old center, but give us some insight into what would be the perfect space for you. Like if you were to develop your own space, what do teachers want? What do early childhood teachers need? And we get insight from them. We're learning a lot that, you can create the perfect structure, but if people don't live in it well, then it's not really a home. If they don't feel comfortable, if they don't feel confident, if they don't trust that their leadership is there for them. And so that was a huge insight for us. And so for us, when it comes to like further support and things that we would need in all these dynamics, as everyone has said, training is helpful, right? Training and equipping is helpful. But it's also the dynamic of like living it out well, starting it off and create, especially as a foundational space, building up the structure well, and then like putting everything in it so that people can navigate it. So the family who needs the support of the resilience training and needs the support of the parenting seminars and the partnerships with Downey's Partnership for Children, but they really just want to say, hey, I want to drop and go. How do we get them to feel comfortable in the structure? Because we also realize that a family that says, I see all the things you're offering and that's what I want, that family typically has a lot of other support systems already. And so trying to make the connection, and this is something I think maybe we can all agree with our experiences, and I even deal with ministry, we can say, hey, here's a seminar on how to get scholarships for college, or here's a seminar on how to do interview skills for employment, and you put it out there, and those who really need it, like one person might show up. And we don't want the Impact Academy to be an incubator for those who already have the supports. Support some there, yes, but one from everyone. So for us, the biggest thing is like making sure, and Mallory did a really great job with helping us kind of work into that system, make sure that all the populations in our community are reflected in our system and in our space. And one thing that I am personally struggling with, all right, so this hasn't happened yet because we haven't opened, but I know typically, like, so we are a Black organization. Our leadership is all Black here at Word Tabernacle. And I know that when trying to create a diverse space for students, like the people who are working here don't have to be members. They don't have to be Christians. They just have to be phenomenal, early childhood teachers. But in order to have our center reflect our community, we have some diversity in our staffing. But one of the things that I am concerned about is that only like when there are Black teachers at white-led centers, white people bring their children, right? If it's a Black teacher in a Black-led center, that's for Black people, right? And we want the center to reflect our community completely. So with all the different populations, all the different backgrounds, and even the struggle of it is a center that's housed in a church building, but it's not a Christian center, right? It's for all kids to be developed, all families to be invested in, and trying to get the public and the populations to, and then sometimes it's going to be proof in the pudding, right? They just have to kind of see it, but trying to think ahead of the game, especially in an area that is separated so much by race, it has so much trauma attached to it, and religious trauma, like trying to work through that stuff and create a narrative even before people are blocked off by it. So yeah, so supporting and figuring out how to do all that stuff will be super dope. And I don't know if anyone has that magic potion. I'm sure we
Sounds easy.
Yeah, super easy. The
Done.
world isn't struggling with that at all.
I mean, really, really exciting insights and areas of opportunity. But I think you were the last one, right? Impacts Academy. Am I missing? We're not missing anyone. Great. We are going to follow on all these threads in the breakout sessions, but for now, I will hand it over to Vichy and Bailey.
Yeah, I think, what do y'all think, Seth, about, can we maybe shuffle around and do break first?
I think that's a great idea. What time should we come back, Vici?
Yeah, want to just do like 10-minute break and say 3:02? Kind of weird, but 10 minutes is 10 minutes.
Cool.
Cool.
See y'all then. Have a good break.
Again. Welcome back from the break, everybody. And what we're going to do is a tool called a resource. And what I want you to do is sense into a specific moment or current experience or a memory that's positive. And what you want to do is you're going to make a mental video of it, right? We're going to do it in the next couple of minutes. So you can lift that up in the chat as you think about what that is. I ask that you would just lift it up in the chat. And then just to give some more thought to who was there, what time it was, what time of day it was, what space were you in, what were some of the sights, sounds, sensations, smells, tastes, textures that you experienced in that moment. So I'm gonna say go. And again, it's a resource, something positive. So if you have something in mind,
Y'all so obvious. I see y'all so obvious.
you could just start lifting those up in the chat, and then I'm gonna ask just a couple of people to share before we go move on to Vici and Bailey. I'll start. My recent one was the beach.
Listening to, this is Carol. My positive thought was listening to the birds sing on Kim's back porch.
Okay. Okay. So Carol, since you're off mic, I'm gonna let's share a little bit more. Okay. What was the weather like outside when you were doing that?
Well, I was on the Zoom, and the weather was pretty. It was on Kim's backyard. Kim and the birds, and just it was relaxing.
Okay.
In the morning, and she, I believe, had her coffee.
That's right.
There she is. And she was living in her space.
Okay.
The back porch, so relaxing. And she's recently retired, so she was rubbing it in some, but it was it was still a great positive memory for me. The sight was beautiful because it was clear that day. The sounds of the bird was like just freedom ring. The sensation I found was relaxing. Even we were digging deeper and giving deep insight about our project. The smell, I couldn't smell it, but I could just only imagine, and the taste of it. I couldn't taste her coffee. She probably tell you about that. And then the texture of it was just refreshing.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
So
Beth.
so as you described that to us, I mean, your face just lit up, and the giggles and the smiles as if you were reliving that right in this moment right now. So that's what a resource does for us, right? It helps to reset us, helps us to tap into a positive experience or moment or memory that then brings positive sensations into our body as well. So that those help to reset us, and something we can certainly do at any given time. And I see that Melissa said playing volleyball by the pool. Quite a few people have gone to the beach, being with their children, their family, by the ocean. Jonathan, he wrote us a whole story here. We saw the ocean, the people, the seagulls, felt the sand underfoot, the cool waters and the warmth of the sun. And we heard the crashing of the waves, the chopper blades ahead. Coast Guard came through and waved at the beachgoers and the laughter of my children. We ate seafood afterward and enjoyed those tastes and smells. Oh my gosh, Jonathan, that might be my resource for the rest of this day, I tell you. Family reunion, folks were on a cruise, dancing together, the sunshine, the water, the breeze, the laughter, and that's Chandra. Yeah, nice. Tevin says he's with his wife and his children. It jumped down on me. No, yeah, his wife and child at the lake during the sunset. Nice. Was there a breeze blowing, Tevin, for you? What else was going on there? Tevin, come off mute. Can you come off mute for a minute? No? More beach, more sun, feeling the warmth outside, sitting on my back deck, watching the fireflies after sunset. Nice. So again, the resilience tool resource, as we reflect on those moments, and again, the key thing is that you detail that as much as you can. You make that mental video of everything you can possibly remember about that moment, about that memory, to help bring that positive sensory experience back to you. So I hope that you all have experienced your own positive memory in these moments that we just had, or possibly that of someone else, because I know I did. So I'm going to turn it over to Avicii and Bailey now.
Sweet. Thanks, Yvette. Yeah, and awesome to see everyone here, and just loved hearing everyone's pretty thoughtful reflections on what you are learning so far. Just like super fascinating stuff. And so for the next couple of minutes, what Bailey and I are going to share is just, and you're kind of already starting to do it, so I think it will make sense. But when Seth was sharing kind of the shift that we're making in the process, the first couple of months, like we've all spent really trying to understand the problem, keeping our minds pretty open to like what types of input we're receiving, you know, who we might be serving, where we want to interject, like what the data is saying. And in the second half of the program, we are eventually trying to get to a place where we're narrowing a little bit towards testing some solutions. And so maybe that means narrowing on who it is that we want to focus on first, or the type of problem where we want to solve, or like where in our programs we want to intervene, things like that. And so this, what we're going to share today is essentially how you start to make the shift away from your insights and towards creating a space to think about solutions. And so that's like done with a tool called the Design Challenge. So we will introduce what that is, talk a little bit about how this connects to the systems map and leverage. And specifically, you all, I hope, received a document in the mail that had kind of a summary of the leverage strategy. And so we'll talk a bit about how to use that, and then how you can use that to create your own design challenge that'll create the space to think about solutions. And so, you know, when I say design challenge, what are we talking about? And so the idea here is you get a lot of insights, and people were starting to do it already. Sometimes you have like a solution that jumps to mind immediately, and you're like, oh, I heard this and we need to make this program. But in reality, when you think about like innovation, the first things that comes to mind isn't necessarily like the best answer. There is potentially a wide range of possible things we could do to address the problem, we often don't make the space to think about the wide range. We just are like, cool, I have one idea, let's do it. And so the design challenge is a question you write that can be used to create a space for you to brainstorm lots of possible ways to solve a problem. And then you pick 1 or 2 or 3 that you might want to go forward with. And so a lot of what this does is it builds on the insights you wrote. And remember, the insights are designed to think about what's below the surface of the iceberg and sort of help you see the iceberg a bunch of different ways. And then that creates this window of opportunity to be like, man, I never noticed that was below the surface. What are all the ways we can address that? And so the structure of a design challenge, this varies a lot. So this isn't like the one only way, but it's a way, is basically this little like fill in the blank. So it's typically a question that begins with how might we, and then you fill in like a verb, a stakeholder, and the thing you're trying to do. And so an example would be like, how might we support youth to better access mental health services? And that's not like necessarily grounded in anything, but that's kind of how they are. And when you frame this question, you can then use that as a place to brainstorm lots of possible answers. And so, yeah, with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Bailey to kind of talk a little bit about how that connects with leverage in the systems map.
Thanks, Vici. So hopefully you all did get that handout that describes the leverage opportunities that were discovered through the ROI system mapping process. But first, just to take a step back, I mean, I think everyone's heard of this idea of a lever, right? And that's basically what leverage is. It's finding a place in the system where a relatively small engagement can have an outsized impact over time, and again, on the overall health of the system. And I forget exactly who it was, maybe it was Kyle who said something about, we learned about all of these great programs that should be happening, and it made us wonder why they're not, right? And that's because there's a lot pushing against, right? And so being able to find those lever points, those points in the system where we actually have the capacity with our comparative advantage and the resource that we have to do the push that we're able to do and have a greater outsized impact can really help us to be able to actually achieve the transformation and the outcomes that we seek. The next slide, yeah. So in other words, when we work with the energy that's already present in the system, it helps the push towards change not feel so heavy and allows us to move farther ahead. So that idea of how might we unlock change with the energy that's already present as opposed to just forcing or pushing something. Next one. And so here are the these leverage points that were developed through ROI's process. And again, I think hopefully you can recognize, I know this map visual is small, but you should have it hopefully on your handout as well. But you can see that this is another layer of data that was built right on top of their map of context. So they did the work of understanding what was going on in the system, what were the patterns that were continuing to drive and demonstrate the outcomes that they were seeing in the system. You all did your own zooming in to the system to recognize the loops and the patterns that were really showing up in a powerful way in your work and in your communities. And so then on top of that map of context, how the system is currently operating, they then layered this new information of where is their energy for change? Where are there bright spots that are already happening? And then on the other hand, where are places that are really stuck and frozen? Where yes, they may be really important, but we're not going to get there by going straight at it. We might need to find a little bit of way around and start chipping slowly through other ways. So through that analysis of the different type of energy, and again, this was with a range of stakeholders from across the system, across different organizations, together they identified these 3 leverage points for building a more resilient system. So the first being around learning. So increasing knowledge and awareness of the drivers and outcomes of trauma in the community, as well as building capacity for appropriately identifying and treating trauma to improve health outcomes and reduce the strain on systems of care. So I know you all, many of you have probably been through some of the training efforts that ROI has been offering as part of their efforts around this leverage point. The second over here in the top is around healing. And that healing was described as disrupting traditional pathways of responding to negative coping behaviors with punishment and isolation. Instead, facilitating opportunities to build new skills through repetition, healthy relationships, and safe spaces to fail. So ways that you can fail and learn from that failure, right? And have a safe space to try again. So that healing was a big leverage point that the community identified as having the potential for great impact in the system. And finally, here in the green is the idea of connection. So as healing and new skills are developed in leverage point 2, we must also open pathways for reintegration into systems that facilitate growth and self-determination. With increased knowledge and understanding in trauma-informed practices built through leverage point 1, right? Schools, employers, and communities get to tap into that lost potential, of those folks who have been excluded and separated from the system. So I want you to notice there that each of these is a unique area. It's a unique point that offers a lot of potential for design and zooming in, and they're all connected. So when we zoom out, we can each see how any of our efforts in one area of the system are supporting and supported by efforts in other areas of the system as well. So we'll keep going through that as well, but I want to just give you that background.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Bailey. So I'm just gonna walk through a little bit of like how we then take, if the idea here is like, we're all in this group together making these shifts in the system, and if we can align them to areas that we already know to be high leverage, and we know them to be high leverage because of community engagement from folks in Edgecombe, like potentially the overall impact of that could be really huge. So I want to talk a little bit about how it is that we might take the insights that you all are already generating and kind of strategically focus the efforts that you then take in some of the areas that are high leverage. And so essentially, like the steps for doing that we've outlined are, you kind of start from looking at the insights you already have and think about each of them and sort of say, like, how do these fit with these different leverage areas? So like, do you already have insights focused on potentially learning, healing, or connecting? Because if so, that might be like a really high leverage opportunity to do something. And then from there, there might be like one insight that really sticks out. It doesn't have to be the one insight you ever work on. Like, you can go back to the other ones, but kind of give some focusing point to be like, this one really feels high energy. And then what I'll walk through is how you can take that insight and flip it into a how might we question. And that question then creates a space for you to brainstorm tons of ideas from which you might choose one or two. So it sounds like really high stakes. Like, I can mess up and choose the wrong thing. It's not. You always have chances to go back, so don't take it too seriously. Just kind of follow along with me for a sec here. So like I said, the first thing you're going to want to do in this process is look at the insights you already have and say, like, how do they fit onto the leverage strategy? Do they align to some of these areas that we're talking about? And it might be that they align with multiple, or it could be that they're kind of not that connected. Some of them aren't. And that might tell you a little bit about, whether it's a good one to start with or not. Once you've done that, you might want to pick just like one to start with. One that you're excited about, one that feels aligned, maybe one that just you can't stop thinking about. And take that overall idea and fit it into this little fill in the blank. So kind of simplifying the insight you have into like blank stakeholder needs a way to do blank because, but, or surprisingly, and then, a piece of the insight that you actually came with. We'll walk through an example in a second, so it'll make more sense. But once you've kind of fit that sentence here, again, it doesn't have to be totally perfect. You can pretty easily flip it into a how might we question. And so you already would have put a stakeholder into the blank here. You can then like pop it into here, and kind of flip your insight into like what you're trying to do. So like, how might we, support whoever to do XYZ that's coming out of like an opportunity from your insight. And once you have that question, it's neat. You could brainstorm kind of just by listening to it, a ton of possible solutions. And that's what we're trying to get to. And finally, just a couple of common pitfalls that I want to highlight that you might want to check yourself against is sometimes our design challenge. Sorry, I'm at my parents' house and they're getting a lot of visitors right now, it seems like. Doorbell keeps ringing, but sometimes we put the solution into the challenge. So you'd be like, how might we build a pre-K program for this population? And there you're already like prescribing that it needs to be a pre-K program. You want to get a little bit away from like what it actually is and more to like the overall end result. So you can kind of check and say like, are we doing that or not? Sometimes the design challenge doesn't reference any people. In this case, it's hard to do that because you have this like stakeholder blank. But if that stakeholder is like a thing, like a hospital, you might want to change it to be like, who are you actually talking about? Who inside the hospital? And then finally, sometimes our challenges blame people for experiencing problems. And if that's the case, you might want to rethink whether it's really about people solving their own problems for themselves or something in the system or somebody else that needs to be influenced. So once you come up with one of these challenges, you can check it against these and just like go back and update yours until you're in a good place. And so I'm gonna actually turn it over to Bailey to walk through an example, and I hope this is okay. With the Hope team, we pulled one of your insights to use as kind of the guinea pig. It doesn't have to be the one that you use, but it kind of is a good example that I think will illustrate the process. So this one is about school administrators kind of expressing that some of their students may not trust them fully or that they might not have strong relationships, and wondering if that's because they've had a previous bad encounter with teachers in school, perhaps because it's uncool to have close relationships with teachers, and wondering if there's a way to leverage trusting relationships that do exist to serve as a bridge to other ones. So yeah, Bailey, if you want to kind of narrate the process of how you would turn this into a design challenge.
Yeah, thanks, Vici. So I was, doing a bit of a leap and a bridge and probably doing some assumptions, but trying to sit myself in your chairs in this one. And again, using those leverage insights to help us focus our efforts based on, known context opportunities, but also really letting these insights shine and speak for themselves. So, taking this example here, Vici, if you want to go to the next slide. I just thought about how those might fit. And one of the things I noticed was that insight of that first quote, where it seemed like that person, that interviewee, was having kind of a light bulb moment of the complexity of factors leading to some of the behaviors that they were seeing. So that, I saw as maybe a potential for building on that or an opportunity to learn. Then thinking about the healing leverage point, definitely hearing a lot there and sensing into that low trust, both present and historical, between youth and the teachers and administrations, as well as parents and schools from their own past experience. So recognizing that as, potentially an opportunity to tap in to that healing leverage point. And then finally, in the connection area, really sensing that drive to connect youth with wisdom, learning, and clear paths towards success, but recognizing the barriers to that that they were facing. So that was kind of just really a rough layering of those insights around these different leverage areas. And I hope that helps also to see how each of these leverage opportunities, it operates at multiple levels. That's what the beauty of a systemic insight is. This could be something very small and individual that happens, but it could be something very large across the community. So all of those insights can tap in to these different leverage areas. Okay, next slide, Vici. Yeah, so just selecting onto one of those. Here's an example of a possible insight statement. So young people need a way to access positive role models because trust isn't strong with teachers and administrators who might want to help. So just very, very simple, noticing an insight there. And again, not putting any blame on either the youth in having this experience or the teachers and administrators. I mean, they really want to help, right? Everybody's kind of caught in this pattern of limited trust and connection, and really focusing on that opportunity of offering those positive role models and guidance. So next slide. So flipping it into a design challenge, and I'm going to offer two different options here. So first one, kind of focusing in on that healing leverage point. So how might we hear and heal the old wounds between students or families and schools to build trusting relationships for learning? You can see this is pretty broad, but it gives a lot of space for brainstorming and building onto new ideas. It gives space for, how we target students, how we target families, how we connect with schools. And then the second one is just another option. How might we connect and upskill youth leaders or program alums to provide peer guidance and modeling towards success? So that kind of idea of some folks might not be in the space right now to reach out to adult role models, but maybe a first step is reaching out to a peer role model. So again, lots of different opportunities for brainstorming and design within that, but it gives us a path, the first step on a path that we can continue to explore and learn from.
Awesome. So yeah, just to summarize that, I guess before I summarize, I think I just want to reiterate that kind of the idea here is to create opportunity. And so I'd just be curious even now, if you just think about it, as you hear this question, like, are there ideas coming to mind of solutions? And potentially a lot of them. And if so, that's sort of the point. It's like bridging the gap so that you can go from your insights to then say like, wow, I look at this question and I have like 10 ideas, or maybe more than that. And that's kind of the track that you all will be following, is taking some insights, framing one of these questions, and then creating the space to think about a lot of possibilities before you like decide on one that you're going to do. And so, yeah, to kind of reiterate, these are the steps that you follow to get to that point. It's part of the upcoming homework, which I'll walk through in a second. And there's like a template that has all this. So you don't have to memorize it, but that's essentially what we're doing. And so before we close out on that, just want to see if anyone had any questions about that process, or even just like comments, aha moments, anything like that. Cool, sweet. And so, yeah, with that, I'm just going to spend a couple minutes previewing what the homework looks like moving forward. And it's a little different, and that's kind of why I want to spend time on it. And then you'll have a little bit of time in breakouts with your coaches to sort of make a little bit of a game plan of how you want to tackle it in the coming months. And so, as Seth said earlier, the remainder of the program is really focused on getting towards like testing multiple ideas. And again, like testing can be in a small way. It doesn't have to be like launching a whole program. It could just be like creating a one-pager that describes something and seeing if anyone wants to sign up for it. And then making updates to that until you get to something that feels sticky. And so in order to do that, the shift that's going to happen is up until now, after every convening, it's sort of been like, we all have the same homework and we all, do it at the same time. So like everyone's doing interviews for a month and then everyone's making insights for a month. Moving forward, it's a little different. There's sort of this set of steps that you will go through multiple times, but you may not go through it at the same speed as anyone else. And it might not even be the same speed for you each time. And so what we've tried to do is provide you with a set of tools to work through each step, but a little more room to do it at the pace that works for you. With still the idea that by the end, you've gotten the chance to loop through this at least 3 times, but it might not always be like 1 loop per month. It might be a little different than that. And so I just want to show you a little bit about what this document looks like so you can understand what we're talking about. And then, yeah, you'll have more support to kind of make a plan. Let's see. Did that switch over to this document? Do you now see a document? Okay, sweet. So the homework document that we'll actually use probably for the rest of the program looks like this. I'll drop in the chat right after this, the folder where you can find your own. It's got, as usual, like a little video that'll probably resemble what I'm telling you right now, and a visual of the process. And so the way this will work is moving forward, what you all will do is sort of look at this and say, like, where are we in the process? Like, what is the next thing that we most need to do? And then access the instructions for that process and work through it, and then move on to the next one. And so it's less of like, we're not going to tell you, you got to do this in 2 weeks and then this in 3 weeks. It's like, build the plan for how you can work through this at the pace that you need to. And after you complete each step, the submission is just like a simple Google form. And the Google form just asks you, like, what team are you on? What step did you do? And so like of this whole thing, like maybe you just framed your design challenge. Then you click that and kind of add a link to just what the document for that. And then you can express like if you need help or if you're looking for specific feedback. So it's more so a way for us to get a sense of where people are and for you to document kind of like where you need support. And so you'll see down here for each step in order, there is a video and or slides that walk through like how to do that step. And then a template that helps you through it. So for example, if you decide that your team is like ready to write your design challenge, you can click right here. And this document basically walks you through what Bailey and I just talked about. So you don't have to remember the steps. You can kind of just like work through them right in this document. And then at the end, you would submit on a Google form that you did it. And then you might say, okay, we made the design challenge. Now we're ready to brainstorm solutions. And you click on this and you have kind of the template that helps you do that. That starts with your challenge and then walks you through like the actual agenda for doing a brainstorming session. And so, once you did that session, you'd go through and submit the Google form. So the idea is kind of like you're working through these steps at your pace and as many times as you need to. And we're kind of able to keep track of that through this form. And at the bottom, what this last page is just like how you're done with a step. And so, for example, how you're done with empathy is like you defined what you needed to know and what you still want to know and did 5 to 10 interviews. And if you've done that stuff, then you're like, okay, I think we're ready to do the next step. And so you can check yourself to be like, are we quite ready to move on? Or is there something else we need to do using this checklist? And that checklist will be the same for the rest of the program. So essentially, yeah, just wanted to frame that at this point, it's sort of more of like creating the space to really dig in on this idea of like coming up with ideas and testing, not necessarily like introducing a bunch of new steps to the rest of the program. And we've tried to just like coalesce the process for doing so here. Yeah, and kind of wanted to just see right there, Seth, if I am missing anything on that or things you want to add.
Just the message that you got a lot of support around you. So it doesn't have to all make sense in this moment. And ask questions, ask your coaches questions, ask us questions.
Yeah, trying to make it simpler because like overall, like the process is, it doesn't need to be super complicated. So if we're not doing that, please ask questions or tell us. And so, yeah, for the next like 15 or so minutes, you're gonna have some time in your groups to make a plan. So in that case, I wanted to frame up like what's coming next. And essentially the idea between now and the next convening, and this will be pretty much true between the remaining convenings, is to meet with your coach and your team and just think about like how, you know, maybe some idea of a calendar of like how you might use the next several months to cycle through generating and testing some ideas. And so you just might want to get a sense of timing and be like, okay, you'll probably need to do more than one step in between each convening. And so realistically between now and August, you know, what are the 1 to 2 next things you all want to do and how is that going to get done? It just, some of these steps, it's a little harder to do last minute because you need to reach out to people or you might need to schedule something. And so it can help to just like think ahead about when and how that'll get done, or maybe you split up tasks. I mean, all that stuff is possible. But I would encourage you to have that conversation sooner rather than later, and then, you know, begin to actually work through 2 to 3 additional steps on the homework. And then of course, when you're done with them, submit the Google form. And so you'll have some time in breakouts now to think about it, but also like, if that feels like a lot, I would suggest that you could also invite us to your next coaching or team meeting, and we can like really dig into making the project plan for this. And then as usual, as you're doing it, if you need support, please, through your coach, request that in your meetings. And so, yeah, I'm gonna send folks into breakout groups with your coach and your team for about 10 to 12 minutes or so to kind of reflect on that and make a game plan. But it's just taking a second to make sure everyone's in the right one. But yeah, anything else that you would add to frame up this breakout?
Yeah, you said it great. Just kind of phase 2, it's shifting to planning, more planning in front and less doing the homework last minute. So time to do that together now. Make a plan on what we're going to attack.
I guess the other thing I wanted to do was put the a link to where those homework documents actually live in the chat. So if it's helpful to pull that up. That paste. There it is. Maybe it will now. Sweet. Okay. Any questions or thoughts before we hop into breakouts? Okay, you will be sent, but if you're in the wrong place, just tell me.
Cheek.
Cool. I think we're all back. So yeah, I know that went by quick, but we are gonna kind of wrap up in the next couple of minutes, and then definitely here to follow up with your teams or coaches, kind of with whatever feels like would be most helpful, either from us or from a facilitator in an upcoming section. But wanted to make sure to share a couple of closing announcements. The first one is actually about, this has come up a bunch from different people, about funding. And so obviously, as we're starting to talk about like shifting towards coming up with ideas and then implementing them, there is this question of like, do we have funding available to do that? And so I have kind of two updates to share. The first is that after each convening, you all should be receiving to your organization $1,500. And so first of all, if you are not receiving that, please let us know. But if you are, you can use it for anything. So it doesn't have to be Resilient Leaders related if there's something else. It's more just kind of like appreciation for the fact that you're taking time and effort out of your jobs to do this stuff. But you can use it for things related to this program. So if things come up and you're like, oh, that'd be great to have, like feel free to consider tapping into that as a source. But in addition to that, for the second half of the program, just like super grateful to have raised some additional funds that are specifically set aside to be used to support pilots. So these small tests of things that you might choose to do. And that's about, it's a pool of about 50K total that is supposed to be distributed across teams. And so we have been working to design a process for how teams could request that and how those requests get approved. And so wanted to just allow Camilla, who is on our team, a couple minutes to share kind of what that process will look like.
Sure, thanks, Vici. So the decisions regarding funding for pilots will be made by recently, or information currently, a Resilient Leaders Initiative Accountability Board. So it'll be made up of community leaders who will be responsible for reviewing requests for funding and materials from teams. And these community members are from diverse backgrounds and experiences. So in education, in the church space, and they will be reviewing and approving requests for funding. So here's just a quick overview of what the process will look like. So the preparation you've already done, you've completed phase 1 of the Resilient Leaders Initiative. And then once you've figured out what you would like to apply for funding, you can submit a written application in Google Forms or record a short informal video that answers all the application questions. And I'll share that with you in a minute. And then the accountability board members will review your application. They'll score the application according to a predefined rubric. And then they will meet within 2 weeks of the application being submitted and decide whether they're going to award funding, whether they have like some details that they'd like to clarify with the team. So that could, that would be a short interview or a submission of another video, or if they just like the team to resubmit because there's some major issues that need to be addressed in their application. And so there will also be an opportunity for the accountability board to provide feedback. And the feedback would be things like, please clarify how you came to this decision, or please provide more information about the priority population that you hope to serve. They wouldn't be suggesting that you do something else, but just requesting more information about why you've decided what you're going to be working on. So as I said, if they feel that you're in this middle ground, there will either be a phone call or an opportunity to submit another video answering their questions, and then the board will share their decision with you. And if you need to resubmit, you can do that as well. And the goal really is that everyone gets some amount of funding. So it will be an iterative process. So the application instructions. So as I said, it'll be either a short video or a written document. And there's a set of questions that we'd like you to answer. And it will be reviewed by the accountability board within 2 weeks. And so I will show that. So you can see there's just this document with some instructions and then the application questions. And there's no word limit, but we think that you should be able to answer each question in 250 to 500 words, or whatever the equivalent of that would be if you decide to do a video. And it can be submitted via the form that's linked here and also in the slides. And there's no deadline. These will be reviewed on a rolling basis. And that's it. Are there any questions?
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Camilla. And just to reiterate, the goal is like everybody gets funds and we're not like evaluating you and you're not super competing. So it's less about like reapplying to the program. Like you already got in the program. We want to support you, and more just kind of like one check on the fact that there's some community members who sort of also understand what you're trying to do and kind of helping you think through it as well, so that we have a process for distributing funds. So there's also no like immediate rush. Like you may not be at the point where you're ready to do this. You're not going to like miss it. So not meant to alarm anyone, just wanted to share ahead of time that there is a process and there's funds available, and we hope and want you to access them as you get clear on the ideas you want to test. And so yeah, trying to get us out of here ASAP. These are the next steps. It's what I shared before, of just kind of like making a game plan for what's the next like 1 to 2 things on the homework that you want to work on, and would encourage you to reach out to us and facilitators for where you need support. A quick reminder from Jenny to just submit your future memory either by mail or by calling this number and leaving a voicemail. It's like a phone number that belongs to me, so it's not super weird. And then this is the date for the next convening, which will be a little over a month from now, August 11th, same date and time as usual. We would love any feedback you have. As always, maybe somebody can drop that in the chat. I'm trying to do it, but it's not letting me. And yeah, before we hop off, would just love to open it up. Well, actually, before I do that, is there anything I missed, Seth?
No, I think just reach out to your coach and to us for support, and please make sure to fill out the survey. I'll drop that in.
Cool. So yeah, I know we're like 2 minutes over. So if you got to go, please don't feel like you have to stay on. And if anyone though would like to just offer any final kind of gratitude shout outs for anything that anyone's done in the last month or so that's been supportive, would love to open the floor for that. Yeah, and if not, if all hearts and minds are clear, we're super grateful to you all, as always, for all the work you're doing. And yeah, that's it.